All right, hey everyone. My name is David Miller. I'm a 2020 DAAP grad, so was in your shoes just about a year ago. I know a couple of my classmates have given similar presentations, and I actually was chatting with Morgan recently and saw that you guys were doing this, and I said, hey, I prepared like a really similar presentation to give to the IDSA chapter at Syracuse, so I can give it to you guys too if you want. So. Slightly different audiences. Most of you guys are in the process of doing internships or have had internships, whereas the audience there was mostly kids that had never been in the industry before. So I'll try and frame it a little bit more towards the DAAP experience, and we'll see how it goes. Just a couple quick notes before we get started. This is very general, so I'm basically going to go through some of my background. I'm going to go then into a couple general tips and tricks for interviewing and portfolios and when you actually have an internship or a job. But remember that this is specific to my experience. I've worked primarily in consumer electronics, so even that is different than some of the experiences that you guys have had or will have. So take that how you will. Another thing is, this is very imperative. Behind me is my brand new couch that just got delivered, and my cat is not allowed on it, and I'm not going to be paying attention, so if anyone sees my cat jump up on the couch, please let me know so I can get her off. Cool. So we'll start off with a little bit about me. So I think this is probably a common theme for a lot of you guys. I've kind of been designing things for as long as I can remember. So I'll show you one of my first design projects, which was basically a sail that I made for myself to fly on my scooter as, I don't know, probably a 10-year-old back in 2007. And another initial design project, which I'm sure you can clearly tell by this beautiful sketch, but this is a magnetic levitation subway system. And I had this idea. I was like, I bet trains could go a lot faster if they didn't have any friction, as, I don't know, like a 7-year-old kid. And my dad is a transportation engineer. And I remember going down into the basement where he was working and saying, Dad, I have this great idea. What if trains could float on magnets and then there wouldn't be any friction? And he was like, yeah, that is a good idea. It's called a maglev train and they already exist. And that was crushing, but I guess my first sort of lesson in design was that ideas like that one are important, but everyone has them all the time. Most of the ideas that you have aren't going to be new, unique, or necessary. It's sort of a vetting process to get to ones that are. And you just have to keep going until something sticks. So although that was discouraging, I just kept going, and eventually design stuck. That's how I ended up at DAAP. Just like all of you guys, spent 5 years there. And did 5 co-ops over the course of my time there, first at Fossil, then at Garmin, at Huge, at Ammunition, and at Astro. And now I currently work at a startup in San Francisco called Verkada. So I live in downtown San Francisco. Verkada is actually in San Mateo, just about half an hour away. So I commute on the train back and forth between here and there. Just to give you a general background on what some of my work is like, up here on the top left, I've got a helmet that I designed for a Dutch bike brand, Van Moof. Down here is sort of an experiential display that I did for my Ritual studio with John Dixon that was about sights and sounds in Cincinnati. This was a fun kind of project after I graduated, just when the PlayStation came out. I really didn't like it. And so I redid the controller to be a little bit closer to what I thought the controller should look like. This is actually my thesis project. And then here's just a quick chair rendering exercise that I did. And so I'm just going to start off by, I think, going through people's personal experiences with the companies that they've worked at in general is really helpful. And because you guys all do internships, I'm sure that some of you have either worked at these companies that I'm going to talk about, or you know people who have worked or who have worked at these companies. So you probably know a little bit about them. But I'm just going to give you a brief summary of sort of what my experience was like, And as you are looking for internships in the future or jobs after graduation, just to give you a little bit of context on, what a job or internship there might look like. So this first photo is from Fossil. I actually sat like right there. This photo I think was taken before I was there. I worked on the Marc Jacobs and DKNY teams, and I did watch design, mostly Illustrator, like colorways, things like that. And I really enjoyed working at Fossil. It's a fun, like fashion-oriented environment, which was sort of new for me. And I learned a lot about like color theory and trends and like the fashion seasons and things like that. But for me, it was a little more 2D oriented than the work that I was looking for. So my next job, I went to Garmin in Kansas City, which I highly recommend if you ever have the opportunity to go there. For this job, I actually my choice came down between Global Brands in New York and Garmin, and I was super torn because I thought at the time that I kind of wanted to do shoes, and I really wanted to go to New York, but I just couldn't quite make up my mind, and at the end, I sort of just randomly chose Garmin, and I was like, you know what, I'll see what happens, and it ended up being like a super important decision for my path, like into consumer electronics, so who knows how my life would have been different if I didn't end up going to Garmin. But Garmin has like a super traditional industrial design process, a pretty big team, super talented team, and you work on mostly consumer electronics, some other categories of stuff like adjacent things, but mostly consumer electronics. And it's very much like, you spend months sketching and you spend months doing CAD and refining CAD and rendering. And we actually even do this is getting rarer and rarer these days, but at Garmin we would do like Photoshop renders of stuff too. And so that was like a good experience for me to like really learn the nitty-gritty of the design process and practice hard skills. Then I went to Huge in San Francisco, consulting firm, and I like to describe Huge for me as like industrial design boot camp, where I was working a ton of hours, putting in a bunch of effort, trying to keep up with the rest of the team. That was more a me thing than a them thing. I mean, you get hired as an intern and nobody expects you to contribute on the same level as a full-time industrial designer, but I really went for it. And I learned a ton. These guys have great aesthetic sensibilities, senses of proportion, and really, really solid hard skills. So it was a lot of like front-end conceptual work for me. A lot of like quick CAD, render it, screenshot it in Keyshot, hang it up on the wall, do that 10 more times, and then at the end of the day, we'd have a review. So it really taught me to like get to form really quickly. And one of my philosophies about industrial design is that it's not necessarily about getting a good industrial designer. Being a good industrial designer isn't about getting 100% of the way there. It's about getting like 85 or 90% of the way there really, really quickly. And that is what Huge taught me more than anything. Then I went to ammunition. So this was after my study abroad semester. I went to TU Delft in the Netherlands. And if you have specific questions about that, feel free to ask me at the end. I know because we missed a round of study abroad because of COVID, not very many people have actually been to TU Delft. So I've gotten some questions about that in the past. Feel free to ask me. And I guess just on a broader note, I'm definitely going to save some time for questions at the end. So please ask me absolutely anything, write down any notes, whatever. So my semester at ammunition was a little bit shorter because of study abroad, but this was really the first opportunity I had to work independently. They gave me a ton of autonomy, which at first was terrifying. Kind of just like coming in to a team of people that I didn't know. They gave me a project and they were like, cool, we'll check in a week, like go do it. And that was like really scary at first, but it was also such an important part of my growth as a designer. Highly recommend the working environment there. You tend to work with like big Fortune 500 clients, and they do super good, solid, serious design work. And for me, yeah, it was the opportunity to to not have someone looking over my shoulder all the time, to start to make decisions for myself, make all of the small decisions between big stakeholder reviews and things like that. And so that was really cool. Lastly, Astro. During school, Astro was my last internship, and this was kind of the culmination of all of those things. Similar work environment to ammunition, but really fast-paced, like huge. Got to work on a bunch of different stuff, from strategy presentations for like tech brands all the way through like modeling parts to be for like final tooling for injection molding and things like that. So I also did some photography while I was there. I like made molds of people's ears. It really felt like a jack of all trades there, and it was fun to just kind of like have my hands in a bunch of different things. And then now I work at a company called Verkada, and probably most of you haven't heard of it. It is a startup that works in physical security. So I think the easiest way to describe it is if you think about like what Nest is for home security, where you have connected devices and you can view your home security feed from your phone, and the user experience is really simple and easy. Verkada is very much like that, but at an enterprise level. So rather than doing like 3 or 4 cameras in a home, we're doing 150 cameras in a factory or an office building or something like that. And then all of the connected building things that go with that. So we also have like access control, like card scanners to get in and out of the building. We also have some environmental sensors and things like that, kind of all of the parts that go into a connected building ecosystem. And here I work on a small team of about 4 people, so there are 4 industrial designers, and then the hardware team itself, which is all of our mechanical engineers, all of our electrical engineers, all of our sourcing people, ops people, that is about 30. So it's cool to work on. Oh, and the company overall is about 500 people and growing rapidly. So we're a little over 500 now. We expect to be at about 1,200 by the end of the year. So very, very rapid growth. It's cool to be part of a company that's exploding, that's doing super well, even in like sort of strange circumstances. But it's also cool to work on a small team, like the 4 of us industrial designers are working with 4 or 5 mechanical engineers and 4 or 5 electrical engineers. It's nice because everyone sort of kind of has input on every decision. So we're working on enough projects that I get to lead a lot of things. I get to, manage stuff, but at the same time, I have feedback whenever I want it from a really small core group of people, which has been nice and is sort of a change of pace from like the consulting environment that I'm used to. I guess before we move on, does anyone have specific questions about my co-op experience? I don't know, Morgan, are people like unmutable? Can they talk, or is this like, am I talking to a mute gallery of mutants?
Yeah, they should be good to unmute themselves if they have a question.
Okay.
Hey David.
Yeah.
So like, when did you decide to really specifically go consumer electronics? I guess that might be at Garmin. And like, when would you suggest like either sticking and being like a really generalist person or going down one path?
Yeah.
Say consumer electronics, transportation, something like that.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. And you're not going to like my answer because I think my answer is that it depends on the person. If you're really passionate about one thing in particular, maybe it does make sense to specialize early. I didn't really particularly mean to specialize in consumer electronics. It just sort of happened. And then once I was there, I enjoyed it. So I kept coming back. But I will say that part of the advantage of going to a program like Cincinnati is the ability that you have to do either, to go really diverse if you want to, or to specialize if you want to. And I guess personally, I would err on the side of diversifying. I would take, if you can, and if it's something that you're, if you're super committed to one thing, great, do that. But if you're not super sure, try out like different industries, try out different companies. I do wish, so I did, my last 3 internships were back to back tech consulting in San Francisco. I loved it. You know, I wouldn't change any one of them individually, but I do think, like, from an overall perspective, I wish I would have done something slightly different with one of those internships. Whether that was, you know, go to a larger corporate company, whether it was work in a slightly different industry, something like that. So I would say, like, I personally, if I were to do school over again, I would say take advantage of the breadth of options that you have, unless you're really, really stuck on something, and that's cool too. And actually, I think I'm gonna dive more into some industry specific stuff. So let's just, I think maybe it makes more sense to hold all questions till the end, so I don't end up like covering things twice. Cool. You guys can still see my screen, right?
Yep, we can.
Sweet. Yeah, so let's talk about, and this is, remember, this is like specific to consumer electronics because that's the industry that I'm familiar with. But some of it can be more broadly applied, and some of it can't. But let's talk about the difference between like corporate, startup, and consulting. Corporate's generally going to be bigger teams, obviously a massive company, so you're going to have more resources. They're going to have a pretty established process. Like this is something that I ran into at Garmin, where it was like, we're sketching on this for 6 weeks, you know? And at the, like week 5, I was sometimes like, oh my God, I don't know how I can sketch on this for another entire week. But then sometimes like good ideas come in that last week. So established process for better or worse. Usually higher pay. That's a generalization, but usually higher pay. Going to be slower time to market. Generally, you have more time and resources to put into something, so it's just going to take a little bit longer for it to get out into the world, usually. They can have a better work-life balance because of that. It's, I think, more typical at a corporate job to be 9 to 5. Obviously, you're going to have late nights, early mornings anywhere occasionally, but corporate jobs tend to be a little bit better about it. You're going to have less project diversity, probably. A corporate company is going to be well rooted within a pretty specific industry, so most of your products are going to fall within that category. And then you've got the benefits and perks of working at a corporate company, whether that's stock options or discounts, free food, things like that. And then actually jumping over to consulting, because that's more the opposite side of the spectrum. You're going to have medium to small teams, usually pretty small teams. Your projects are going to be more short term. Work environment's usually super fast paced. And you're working on a bunch of different stuff. So it's a lot of hopping around from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next on all these shorter term projects. You're going to have great community. I mean, working in a small team like that is always lends itself to having good community, but especially in like my experience working in the San Francisco Bay, like everyone at all of the consultancies knows each other. And that's pretty cool too. It's fun to have that environment. Generally, it's going to be lower pay than a startup or a corporate job, but not always. Work is client driven. That can be good or bad. You know, sometimes you'll have a really impossible client, and sometimes you'll have really great clients. And it can be really intense at times and super slow at others, just based on what projects are coming in when. Startup is kind of the middle ground between the two. And I never really intended to go into the startup world, but I'm kind of glad that I did. It's a nice balance for me of both worlds, where it's still fast paced. I like the jumping from project to project to project, thinking about a lot of different kinds of things all the time. Small teams, I really enjoy working on my small team. You have growth opportunities, so as the company scales, your role is going to scale too, which is pretty cool. And because you're a smaller team, you kind of get to be responsible for more things. Usually they're going to be a higher pay than consulting, but again, not always. Potential for like benefits and perks like stock options, if you IPO. If you guys have specific questions about that, feel free to ask me at the end. That's a little complicated. It can be intense. I mean, Verkada, where I work, we work on really tight project timelines, and I find the intensity exciting, but it's not for everyone. There can be less project diversity, just like at a corporate company where you're more in one lane and your projects are determined by your company and not by your clients. And yeah, it can be unpredictable. You never quite know what's going to happen at a startup. Sometimes your startup could crash and burn, and that's just the way that it is. So how do you choose the right job? There are three ways that I like to think about this. It's value, connection, and growth. So value is the company a place where your skill set and experience could add value to the company? And then also on the flip side, like what value do you derive from working for that company? So I think those are the two main things to think about there. Connection, is this a place where you feel welcome by the people that work there? Environment is super important. And I know that at DAAP especially, we get kind of caught up in this mentality of like picking something for the job, for the work you're going to do, for the impact that it's going to have on your resume. And that's all still relevant. But I think as you move into like longer term career oriented things, the environment that you're in, the people you're working with become more and more important because it just becomes such a large aspect of your daily life. And growth. Where do you go from where you start? If you started a job, what I think it's beneficial, like even at a junior level, even at an intern level, like to start thinking about, okay, how do I move up within this company, or how do I use what I'm able to learn and do at this company to move somewhere else and grow there. So start thinking about like, if I take an internship here, do I think that there's a good chance that they're going to be hiring when I graduate? Is this someplace that I would want to work when I graduate? Or if you're looking for full-time jobs, if I take a job here, is there a clear path for me to be a lead designer at some point, to be a creative director? Is that something that I even want to do? So just start thinking about things like that. What should be in my portfolio? So that's hard. Your portfolio is yours. There's no one size fits all answer, but I'll give you some suggestions based on those three different breakups that we already went through. So corporate, like I said, is going to be more about the process. So generally like a traditional ID process and being very thorough in your ideation, your execution, but especially like your research is going to be really important. And the ability to work cross-functionally with different teams. You'll definitely do that at corporate jobs and startups a little bit more than you would at a consulting agency, for example. Startup, just showing speed, quick form development, rapid iteration, the ability to, spitball a bunch of different things and then narrow down to something that works. At a startup especially, your manufacturing knowledge is going to be important because a lot of times you're doing a little bit of the design, but also a little bit of the like production management because, being a small company that's making things, you kind of have to be a jack of all trades there. They just don't have the resources for, someone like at a corporate company where somebody else would manage manufacturing or understand the engineering of things. And then consulting, just the ability to work quickly, jump between projects and different types of products, kind of show your eagerness, intensity to learn, and then also like excellent conceptual thinking and solid hard skills. I think hard skills are always important, but are maybe more prioritized in like consulting level portfolios than other places. And then just a bunch of general advice in no particular order. This is the boring part of the presentation where it's just a bunch of words on the screen, but bear with me. Hopefully some of it will be helpful. You're not going to land every job, but you should act like you are, and not in a cocky way, but be confident in yourself. And I think that does really make a difference. You should recognize that, especially coming from DAAP, coming with work experience, you are qualified to land jobs. And one thing that I think is important to remember is if you're in the interview stage of a job, your skills are good enough to be there already. It's, companies don't go around and interview people that they don't think are actually qualified to work on their team. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as you're interviewing. Here's just a short list of companies that I've gotten turned down by. So you're not, just to remind you, you're not going to get every job, but you can still learn something from the process. Nobody's ever rooting against you. This is another important thing to remember. I think especially as you're interviewing and maybe starting a new job, it is so much easier for a company and interviewer if it works out. Nobody is ever, sure, maybe people will try to challenge you, but nobody ever wants you to fail an interview because it makes their life easier if you don't, if that makes sense. And don't be afraid to ask questions. I think this goes without saying in an interview, just demonstrating curiosity, but also once you start a job, once you start an internship, full-time job, whatever, ask questions, always. People are always willing to help you. Nobody ever hires you expecting you to come in with all the answers. So don't be afraid to ask questions. On the flip side of that though, and this is kind of a delicate balance, don't be afraid to find the answers yourself. This was, I think, a major thing that I learned in my time at Ammunition, where all of a sudden I just realized that sometimes I had to take ownership for making some smaller decisions. So sometimes there's really good learning opportunities if you choose to buckle down, figure out how to do something yourself. But you always have a fallback. It's always okay to ask questions, and I hope that you remember that. Make a website. This is such a huge thing, and I think, so my year, it took a while for all of us to start to have websites. I think we were kind of like maybe the transition. I would bet that a much higher proportion of you guys listening have websites than people like in your position 5 years ago, So that maybe this isn't as relevant of feedback anymore, but I do think it's really important. Because you can strategize the content that you show differently than in a PDF portfolio. So I know through PAL and in a lot of job applications, you need to submit a PDF portfolio. Totally still relevant, totally something you still need to do. And I will even if I like apply to a job with just a website, I'll still make a PDF sort of like this that I'll talk through during an interview. So PDF, absolutely still relevant. Website is cool though because it allows you to show more breadth. So I would never show more than 3 projects in a PDF portfolio. 4 maybe. I know that's a contentious opinion. Some people like to put 4 or 5 projects in their portfolio. But what I would do is show 3 projects in my PDF portfolio and then like 5 or 6 or 7 on my website. And what's cool about a website is you're allowed to have more like extraneous stuff, and whereas like a PDF is very much like, hey, this is a summary of everything that I need you to know about me. The website is more general, and you can kind of give people the attitude like, hey, click on this project, and if you don't like it, oh well, click on a different project, so people can explore a little bit more, and you're not as tied into just those like those 3 things that you choose to represent yourself. Just a reminder, Instagram is not reality. An example of this is like, this is a sketch that I would post on Instagram, and this is like how I actually sketch when I'm solving a problem. And the same thing goes for renders, for like ideation. Just remember that like especially as the Instagram community, industrial design community picks up attention, and there's lots of shiny renders all over the place, lots of people showing flashy hard skills, that's cool, that's great, that can help you to know how to do things like that. But remember that there's a separation between like how you actually work and how you present work, and be careful of that in your portfolio. And that brings me to sort of like what bothers me about so many of those renders and flashy sketches and things like that. It's that the why is so important. So at a base level, if you can't show me like you can't show me incredible sketching, and you're not great at rendering, if you can show me a project that is moving in the why, that's still incredibly valuable, and in my opinion, in a lot of cases, more valuable. So I encourage you to really think hard about why you're designing something the way you're designing it. And I guarantee you, sometimes it feels like only your hard skills get noticed, only your flashy renderings, get you jobs. And I guarantee you that is not the case. Designers in the industry really do respond to projects that make sense. Be prepared to work on shit that has nothing to do with you. So, and to get excited about it. There have been a lot of times, especially in consulting, that this has happened to me where I get a project that I don't really know anything about, that doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. I don't know why somebody would buy it. But that are excellent opportunities for learning. So an example of that is this is a projector for your anime girlfriend that I worked on when I was at Huge, and like not something that is relevant to like me personally at all. But it was such an interesting experience working with. This was a project for Tencent. They're a massive Chinese company. And just like working with that incredible Chinese team, starting to understand like their sense of aesthetics is slightly different than like San Francisco Bay Area aesthetics, working through some challenges like that and learning a ton. And so just to put that into perspective, when you're starting to pick projects for your portfolio, or maybe you're picking a project for class, and you think maybe you do want to put it in your portfolio, just remember that like the things you're good at, the things you enjoy, and the things that will further your portfolio don't have a ton of crossover. So be cognizant. If you can find something that works for all three, great. But if not, be strategic about like sort of which quadrant you fall into. If you have a ton of projects that are like things that you really enjoy and that you're really good at, but you don't have anything that really shows like breadth of skills or something like that, then maybe that's not a healthy mix. But if you have like a little bit of everything in your portfolio, I think that you'll be okay, because this is such a slim proportion of projects that kind of satisfy all of those criteria. This one's controversial. Don't aspire to be a T-shaped designer. Do you guys know what that term means? The idea is like a T-shaped designer is an expert in one thing and then sort of like branches out in a T-shape. And I actually like to think of it the other way around. Like think of it as like a sideways capital E-shaped designer, where you're like, you have a base knowledge in a lot of different things, and then you have like kind of spikes in your knowledge. And just the idea of like being an expert in anything, to me, is sort of against the idea of what a designer should be. I think that what makes a designer good is to have perspective and to have a variety of inputs that you can kind of shape and mold into something meaningful. And to me, that means sort of being a jack of all trades. So some examples of this for me, I mentioned that I was casting people's ears at Astro. That's what this looked like. I like randomly taught myself to slip cast one weekend. I also do product photography for jobs sometimes. I went to Barcelona and studied under a master cobbler and learned how to like make traditional Italian leather dress shoes. I taught myself like circuitry, and I knew nothing about electronics at the beginning of this project up here, and it was a nightmare, but I figured it out. So I think that there's a lot of value in like purposefully diversifying your skill set, both in just like challenging yourself and enjoying yourself, but also in like shaping that into an output that is meaningful to a project or a team. Self-promotion feels strange, but works wonderfully. Use LinkedIn. And this is something that I found out last year when I was graduating. I started just posting like random stuff that I was doing for fun on LinkedIn. I would post just like a render and a summary of like, what I was exploring with it, or, a quick screenshot of a project that I was working on, and found that I was getting like 20 or 30,000 views on my projects. And almost all the job interviews and offers that I had after graduation came from people who found me via LinkedIn. So this is, I think, I feel like not a lot of industrial designers use LinkedIn really prolifically because it's not very like visual media based, but I highly, highly recommend it if you can get over the hump of like, it feels weird to promote myself publicly, but it really does work, and I encourage you to do it. We're all imposters. This is something that I was just thinking about recently and that I've struggled with quite a bit. I hope that you never feel like you're the only one that feels out of their depth. I want to point out that so many times in my career, and really I'm sure this is true of everyone, so many times in their career they felt totally out of their depth when it's, whether it's starting a new internship and they expect you to have skills that you just are not up to speed with, or for like my example is working in a startup and I'm working with incredibly talented, very smart mechanical engineers, and I'm trying to understand these like really complex camera assemblies. And I'm just so out of my depth. I'm the art school kid on a team of Stanford engineers, and it's so uncomfortable. But if you just remind yourself that everybody feels like that sometimes, that it's part of the process of learning, you do eventually get there. And it takes weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. But feeling uncomfortable like this is a good sign that you're learning and growing. And last but not least, and this is in the same line, your skill set and experiences are unique and relevant, and design is an incredibly broad field. I hope that you're confident in your ability to communicate and solve problems, even if that isn't within the context of traditional industrial design. Cool. So I think we have about 20 minutes for questions. Let me stop my screen share. Who wants to kick it off?
I have a quick question. So we actually had to do a website for this co-op round. And I was wondering if you had any tips for like making that website and kind of the workflow, or like how do people go through your website?
Yeah, for sure. So my sip of water. My personal philosophy in websites and also in PDF portfolios is less is more, is to let your work speak for itself. So when I send a portfolio to a company, or I mean, I'm sure, Morgan, you've seen my website. It's pretty, I make a couple, like I'll try and make like an interesting typeface choice. And other than that, I'll have like a really rational square like layout. I use like a Squarespace template. I'm not like afraid to say that, you don't like, if you want to be a web designer, cool, go for it, like have fun, as long as it doesn't get in the way of the content of what you're trying to show. And if you don't want to be a web designer, it doesn't matter, like just show your work in a way that doesn't inhibit people from seeing it, is the main thing. Like make it easy to digest, and show some diversity, have some fun. I have I have my ID work on the main page of my website, and then I have, I think, a tab called Experiments and Oddities, and it's just like random one-off projects that I've done, or like that me casting ears out of silicone, or like random shit like that. And then I have a tab that's like some of my film work. So I take a lot of film photos, and actually my capstone project was building custom film cameras. And so I just have a page that's all film work. So don't be afraid to show some personality. But yeah, make it easy to navigate. I would say, and you can show more projects than you would in a PDF for sure. I think those are my main tips. Yeah. I would also, I guess, just to build on that, know that understand that you can't, so the biggest difference for me in the approach to a PDF portfolio versus a web portfolio is the knowledge that you can't control how people use your web portfolio. So a PDF is linear. People are going to go through it linearly. That they probably aren't going to spend a ton of time reading stuff. You can make all of those assumptions. And that they might go back and read it afterwards. And a web portfolio, you can make the assumption that people are going to click on anything that visually interests them first. And so that's why I think a web portfolio is a great platform to show like lots of different things, because you don't know who's looking at your portfolio and you don't know exactly what's going to interest them. So give them the opportunity to pick for themselves. Like in a PDF, because you're limited in space, you can't really do that. But on a web portfolio, you can give them a smattering of stuff and they can say, that doesn't really look interesting, but this, and this that they're clicking on might not be something that's actually in your PDF portfolio, but this looks cool, and then they can read through it, look through it, and then decide for themselves whether they like it or not. And if they don't, they'll probably click on a different project, you know? So I guess just embracing the fact that you can't control how people use your website.
I have a question about like what's your like 5-year plan, I guess, coming out of college? Not to be too personal, but just how did you like build that plan, and like what are some things that you're considering as you grow up a little bit and get more mature in design?
That's a really good question. And I think that's especially a good question because I did not have a 5-year plan when I graduated. And I think that I've always been, like personally, I've been averse to the idea of like doing any one thing for too long. I tend to get impatient, bored. I want to do something else. I always want a new challenge, and that's been like my life for like all of growing up. And I think UC and the DAAP program really like played into that, for better or worse, where everything was in 4-month segments. I was constantly moving somewhere new, constantly working somewhere new. And so that very much played into that mentality of like impermanence. And so I just genuinely think when I was graduating, this is just a year ago now, but when I was graduating, I just didn't have the frame of reference for like what it feels like to be doing something for a year, 5 years, 10 years, you know, and I still don't necessarily have that frame of reference, but it's getting closer. So I guess graduating, I had no 5-year plan whatsoever. So I came out here, or so I graduated in May or April, and then started interviewing pretty much right away. I had actually intended, I mean, this is right in the middle of COVID, so I had intended to use the time to like regroup, not do design work, like just, you know, take a break, not burn out. I guess my initial plan for graduation, like before COVID happened, was that I was pretty dead set on going back to Astro, and that was something that we had sort of, you know, verbally talked about at the end of my internship there, with me coming back, and so that went out the window with COVID, and so I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna like take a break. I'm gonna like distance myself a little bit. I'm gonna process. You know, what I've learned over the last 5 years, and I'm going to figure out what it means to me as an industrial designer. And that didn't last very long, because for whatever reason, I started just working on ID stuff, even though I didn't have to. And I've never been that kind of person. Like I was not, I'm sure you guys all know, like Tanner and Ellen and my grade are very much like, they always do so much work. They're so good. They're so on top of it, so well time managed. And I was not that kind of person. And I didn't expect to, as soon as I didn't have to be doing industrial design, that I started doing industrial design all the time. And because I was doing ID and posting it and getting some attention for it, like on LinkedIn, I started getting interviews lined up over and over and over again. And so I spent probably 2 months with a couple interviews a week. And so I was constantly prepping for those. And at the end of it all, I ended up coming to Verkada, which is where I'm at now. And so I've been here for about 8 months now. And I started off as an intern contractor, and then started full-time at the beginning of the new year. And okay, so I guess I still haven't really answered your question. So I think now my 5-year plan is I'm going to stay where I am for as long as I can. I have learned so incredibly much, and I don't anticipate that slowing down anytime soon. So I sort of have a unique privilege right now at Verkada of being part of a company that's doing incredibly well, and a startup that's doing incredibly well, which is unique, somewhat rare. I mean, they are about 5 years old and probably worth like $2 billion plus right now, which is pretty amazing for a company this size. And so it's definitely not going anywhere. And what's so unique about my job and experience there is that I get to work on a small team, but I have so many opportunities for leadership, where I probably lead personally 5 or 6 different projects right now. And that's of the 25 to 30, if you include really long range stuff, that the 4 of us are working on. So it's such a cool environment where, each one of us leads a good chunk of things, but all of us are involved in everything. And I get to work really closely with talented engineers and product people and, software people to like make something happen from start to finish. And that is something that I was really, I think, missing in the consulting experience, where you can put in a ton of work into something over the course of a couple months that your consultancy is working on it, and then it kind of disappears. And sometimes you get to be involved in like the creation of the thing, the manufacturing of the thing. Oftentimes you just never see it again, and you're like, what happened to that project that I spent so much time on? And you'll never know. And sometimes it comes out, a year or 2 later, and it doesn't look anything like you designed. So just the involvement in the entirety of the process, like, when we have a new product, we start with sketching architectures, like how many pieces should this be? Should this be like a module and the housing? Should it just be like one large module? Should it be, how do these parts come together? And then all the way through, hey, here's what the surfacing should look like. I'm going to do the surface modeling in SolidWorks, and I'm going to send it to our mechanical engineers. And then I get to work with our factories in Taiwan, and our prototyping houses to like make appearance models, and then factories to make the final thing, specify textures, make sure that things are coming off the production line like they're supposed to, and even like design the packaging and the startup guide experience. So you get to touch like everything. And it can be overwhelming, but I find it really fascinating and challenging. And there's always something new to do, always a new challenge. So I've been learning so much. I don't see any reason that I would be leaving where I am now anytime soon. 5 years is kind of a long time in the industrial design industry, so we'll see. But as my team grows, I see definitely some opportunities for me to grow with it. And we'll see where it takes me. If I weren't at Verkada, I don't know where I would go from here. So I hope that answers your question. That was quite a long-winded answer. Anybody?
Yeah, I think somewhere in there you did.
Good, cool. Anybody who wasn't in my Mentors and Muses group freshman year want to ask any questions, or is it going to only be the people that already know me? Come on. Nothing?
I have a question. So David, I think you do like really, really good visualization of things. Like your renderings are like really, really good, and how you I've seen your portfolio a lot of times in your website, and everything has been like refined very well. So I just want to know, like, how much effort have you ever put into, just like rendering things, and because I'm working on this way and feel like this is like sometimes it's really time consuming, and I couldn't see how can I get to there. If you could tell us about like how did you do something from Fusion or like very basic keyshot rendering, how did you get where you are right now?
Yeah, so I guess a lot of the credit for that I will give to the jobs that I've worked at and working with people that have given me tips or tricks along the way, or just a lot of it has been like, I'll do a render and somebody will be like, this is bad for this reason, or very like straight up about it, or okay, maybe not that blunt, but they'll tell me like, oh, hey, here's how you could improve this render specifically. And part of it is I worked for picky people, and on my team now, I would still say like I'm not the pickiest person. And sometimes like for me, something is like, just get it done, get it visualized, get it out there. And I think that is a perfectly fine way to work for the most part. It's the presentation aspect that'll get you. And so It's so challenging. This is a hard question because the level of visualization that you'd see on my website even isn't really necessary to design a product. Like these really dialed renderings where the lighting is perfect, where the background is seamlessly the same color, whatever, all the little details that make a render like really, really nice don't actually have anything to do with the design of the product. So I would say first things first, like focus on the hard skills that actually matter to the design of the product before you focus on the rendering aspect of it. And I know everybody hates this answer, but like visualization is just a practice thing. The good thing is you have so many resources now, especially with Instagram, of people who are phenomenal at rendering. So copy stuff. Like if you, I 100%, like when I was a younger student, I would copy a rendering almost exactly. Like I would put my product in an environment like and try and match the lighting that I'd seen somewhere online, and you learn a ton through that. Like the internet's free, use it for inspiration, and yeah, I mean, yeah, you just gotta, it's like trial and error, I guess. And another thing is you should know that the stuff that's on my website, whether it's a rendering or the actual design of things, almost none of it is the first version. A lot of the things that are currently on my website, and to be fair, most of the stuff that's on my website is all student work. I haven't really updated my website since I've been working full time. But a lot of that is stuff that I've like done and then redone, or like at least re-rendered, sometimes remodeled. So don't be afraid of like revisiting a project. I think I still have my, no, maybe I don't have my power tool on there anymore. My power tool was like hair clippers, and I think I redesigned that entire thing like 3 different times. But I was like, well, the research was good, like there's something there. And like redesigned it, re-rendered it over and over again. So I guess it's something you just gotta kind of chip away at, and don't get discouraged. If people are showing if you're like, I'm trying to render this in a way that's super flashy and it's just not working, don't get discouraged by that, because at the end of the day, the people that you actually want to work for can see through that bullshit. Like,
yeah.
It's about the design of the object at the end of the day. So.
I see. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. All right. 5 minutes. We got time for one more question.
I mean, okay, I jumped in super late, so I've only heard your response, I think, to, that was Ian's question. I heard that, and then the most recent thing. But I guess maybe somebody's already asked you this, I don't know, but any other like cool projects or things you've worked on recently, either at your co-ops or something that you could talk about that's like out in the market today? Just
yeah,
anything.
That's out. That's a tricky part.
Yeah, just curious to see if any of those back end co-ops end up putting out projects or something like that.
Yeah, not a ton of stuff that's out. You probably weren't in for this. I think really, unfortunately, the only thing that I've worked on that's like actually out is the anime girlfriend projector, which if you didn't see that, you didn't miss much.
I'll check it out. I'll look it up on my own.
Okay. Yeah. Google Tencent Project S. TENCENT Project S. Yeah, most of the stuff that I've worked on for consultancies in the past year or so is, I assume, still in the process of getting made. I mean, this is kind of what I was talking about with consultancies. You do work and then you're like not really sure what happens to it. I'm working on a bunch of stuff right now that is not out yet, but that will be soon. And a couple of those things are pretty cool, but I can't really tell.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. Oh man, I wish I could.
No, not a problem. Cool. Thanks for giving it a shot. I'm always just stoked to hear about
Yeah,
people
sure.
that, got to work on something. I feel like it's so dope when you finally see it go to market. So just always curious.
I'll use that as another opportunity to plug my current job. What is another thing that's really appealing to me about working in startup land is because so I mentioned before you get to be involved in every aspect of something from the design to the packaging to the production. But what's also cool is the timeline is so accelerated. So where Google, for example, might take 2.5, 3 years to develop a new product. We generally do a new product in anywhere from 6 to 18 at the most months. Usually between like 6 and 12 months. So like I have stuff that I started like when I started working that will be out by this summer. So in less than a year of time at Verkada, I'll have a project that I led from start to finish on the market, which is cool. And you don't really get that opportunity in a lot of other spaces. So
Yeah, it's super cool that you mentioned that because I actually just accepted a co-op at a startup, not like a consultancy or any like a major design company, but like a startup that's running off of funding. And it's like I was pretty skeptical at first,
yeah,
but it's like crazy how much they make you a part of like every aspect because it's a startup and that's like the nature of it. And like the product's coming out in a few months and they just gave me this list of things and I'm like, holy crap. So it's cool that
nice. Yeah.
it's overall a good experience.
What's the name of the company?
It's a company called Goodwell Co. Goodwell Company, yeah.
Yeah.
They just make electric toothbrushes, but
Oh, nice. Sweet.
yeah, I just hadn't heard of other startup experiences, so it's cool to hear this.
Yeah, for sure. And that is a great segue into my last point of the evening. Um, it's not open yet, but we are going to be hiring an intern. The posting should be open later this week, probably. So if you have any interest at all in like interviewing, whether you're whether you're looking for something full-time after graduation, which is what I did. I started as an intern there and then ended up staying on full-time, or you're looking for a summer co-op, hit me up. I know it's probably a little late for people looking for summer co-ops, but I will give you more, I don't know, somebody has my contact information, right? Reach out to me and I will connect you with our team, and we would be happy to speak with any of you if you'd like to come to San Francisco and work on some security products.
Great. I know some people are still looking, so hopefully they'll reach out.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this. I learned a lot from it, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.